Hey guys, Stealth here. Welcome to the War Room. It's a Monday, so I got to talk about what happened last week, what interesting things are going on this week, interesting military stuff I've been reading, movies I've been seeing. To start off with the latter, I haven't really seen any movies lately. Not too much time for that recently, so I intend to go sometime this week because there still are plenty of interesting movies out there. Oh, talking about movies, you guys probably heard by now that Leo finally got his Oscar. We're gonna have to find something else to do other than those when is Leo gonna get his Oscar memes. So if you have any good replacements for that, let me know about that in the comments. First, a bit of a public announcement. If you were one of the few who saw that I uploaded XCOM episode 36 this morning, and I'm talking this morning as in Monday 29th of February morning, yeah, that was not supposed to be there. I deleted it pretty damn quickly. So if you got an email that there's a vid from me, just ignore that. Episode 36 is coming Thursday. And it was a bit of a case of premature uploading, because I usually upload my stuff in batches, schedule everything, and this one just slipped through the cracks. Anyway, last week I talked about what I was reading, which was the US Naval Institute on Naval Tactics. It's a book by Hughes. I'm reading it on Scribd, or Scribd, I still really don't know how to say that. You can find it in the description down below. And there were indeed some very interesting stories in that book. A few of you I'd like to share though, because there are some really interesting lessons to be learned from that specific book. Now the book isn't a sort of guidebook on naval tactics, but it takes extracts from different sort of books. Let's say an extract like this one from the Falkland War, where the British had a task force, a naval task force that was heading for the Falklands. Now, this naval task force was pretty much testing new naval tactics, because the British really had not been in naval conflict since the 1940s, so let's say since World War II, or at least not to my knowledge. Aside from that, there were a lot of innovations, and they really wanted to test some of the stuff. One of the newer units, or newer things that were going on, were of course missiles. There were, I believe, not yet harpoons, but the predecessor of the harpoon. And of course the British task force got attacked by the Argentinian Air Force with the Exocet missile, the French one. So here's what happened. A destroyer, and this destroyer was the Ambuscade, got attacked by a dual strike of anti-ship missiles. The destroyer instantly fired up a wave of chaff. So they fired a few rockets or missiles which deployed chaff to make sure that the missiles would be deceived into going for another target. It seemed to be going really well. The missile was indeed deflected. Or actually both missiles were, so the destroyer was safe. And you'd say, good job, mission accomplished. You kept the task force safe, or at least you kept yourself safe. And that's pretty much where the problem started. Because while they were keeping themselves safe, the missiles flew through the chaff. And what ended up happening was that the large transport, or container ship, the Atlantic Conveyor, was hit by those missiles. They lost a few £100 million of supplies, materials, vehicles. I don't think too many lives were lost, but the lesson is really look at your angle of approach and consider what could go wrong. Where could the missile hit next? If it does not go for the intended target, what else could it go for? By looking at that, you can have all sorts of interesting problems arise, not only when creating naval task forces, but also when creating battle groups. Let's say if you're getting hit by, or if someone on the enemy team in a war game is going to fire cluster artillery at you, they're going to start and aim for your lead group. And your lead group may not be there by the time that the missiles actually strike. But what happens to whatever happens behind you? What are your allies doing? So whenever you see an airstrike, let that come in, or a missile strike, or whatever kind of attack, make sure you notify your allies and tell them that there's a threat vector which is over there. That's where the threat's coming from. Be ready to adjust. Be ready to change course. Another interesting thing from that book is that you should look at not only a ship, but let's say also a tank like this one, as not only a weapon or a weapon system, but a weapon operation. And by weapon operation they mean that you should also consider not only the tracks, the gun, the engine, the entire platform, but also the crew inside. The crew are trained in a specific way. The crew have had training in strategies, military doctrine, tactics. All of that makes up for the weapon operation. So not just the weapon system, weapon platform, weapon whatever, weapon operation. It includes handling, tactics, and just as important, expertise. You could put some very expensive or very experienced people in a tank and get completely different results from when you put rookies in there. Final thing, the third thing I wanted to share from that book was a very, very interesting story. It's a story about how Israel got its navy, or at least part of it. The Israeli navy was not really in a great shape. They pretty much inherited a lot of the ships as hand-downs from other navies. So ships that were superfluous or that were rendered outdated were handed over to the Israeli. And then the Israeli decided to go for their own ships. They thought that with a couple of corvettes, or actually I suppose you could call them missile attack boats, they could pretty much control whatever was going on around their shores. The problem was, they didn't have any of those ships. So they started developing the missile, and at the same time they started looking for the ships that could support them. Now they were quite fond of a German design for a fast attack boat. So they went over with a detachment to Germany to talk about how they could modify that ship. Because the ship was not designed for anti-ship missiles, but it was designed for a different purpose. So they had to sort of re-engineer the ship. So the ships were finally built by Germany, and come the time to ship, Germany says, sorry, we can't actually start producing these things because we're afraid of the Arab response here. We are very, very hesitant, and I'm sorry, but we're going to have to cancel the agreement. At which point, of course, Israel was left hanging in the breeze, without a navy, without fast attack ships. And at the same time, the threat to their shores was still very real. So there was still a problem there. Now what they did was pretty cleverly made use of the European, let's say, integrated weapon development. So a sort of sister company of the German designers had a sister company in France. And the sister company was allowed to buy the designs of the Germans and then build them under a licensing deal, which of course allowed the Israeli to buy from France. So the Israeli sent over troops actually naval, mariners to start crewing the ships, to start overseeing construction, to start looking at how they could employ these ships. At the same time, the pressure on France was also growing and growing, and Israel had originally intended to buy 12 ships from them. Now, what eventually ended up happening was that after some time, France said, well, sorry, your ships are done. So they had actually been produced, and the last 5 were detained. They were not allowed to leave as a sort of embargo towards Israel. I don't believe that France was the only country doing this at the time. So Israel now has only 7 of their intended 12 ships. So it's pretty much down to half their intended navy strength. What do? They came up with a ruse. One of the retired admirals who was overseeing this program had a Norwegian friend who was running a very large company that also had oil rigs under them. So what they did was release their claim on the ships. They said, okay, if we can't have them, we're not even gonna buy them. So they said, okay, you can just sell them as you see fit. Which is pretty much what the France decided to do. So the French decided to sell these ships to a Norwegian company that happened to be interested. The Norwegian company said, "Okay, I'll buy these things. When can I expect shipment?" And France said, "Well, okay, no problem. There's no embargo towards Norway, so we can just easily release the ships now." So they did. And what happened next, of course, was that these ships were in fact not crewed by the Norwegians. They were crewed by Israeli. So, the Israeli took control of their ships, made it out of the port, and started heading south at best speed. They had parked some tankers or some freighters along the shore or along the route towards Israel because those things could not make it on their own. They just did not have the required amount of fuel. So what ended up happening was that Israel, in a way, had to steal their navy. I mean, they paid for these things, they just couldn't use them, and in the end, through a ruse, they managed to get these things after all. Think of it what you will, but I thought it was a very, very interesting story of how you can go about doing your business. I'm not sure it's the right way to do it, but come on, this country had to find some way to survive. And I don't want to have a large political debate on my channel. That's not the intent of this video, nor sharing the story, but very, very interesting way of doing things. Last part is about amphibious operations, which in Wargame we don't have too much to do with, but we still do it from time to time, or at least I try to do it. It usually doesn't end well, but I try to make do. Anyway, what was happening with the coastal operations or the amphibious operations is that, interestingly enough, throughout history, if you have a determined naval attacker or amphibious attacker, he is always going to beat the defensive forces. More often than not, the attacker has won the battle. Not saying that that battle or that the victory always came at a very cheap price. They were always a lot of lives lost, or at least in most ops. But there was not really any good way to defend against naval operations or against amphibious operations. So what they tried to come up with is a way to have a successful naval defense or amphibious defense. So you're not the party attacking, you're the party defending. One of the crucial things that they discovered is that you have one commander for all the forces. And this is pretty damn rare, because normally you'd have one sort of large overall tactical commander or strategical commander, and he'd have his sub-commanders who are then tasked with the various commands of, let's say, the air assets, the naval assets, the landings, logistics. All of that made it a lot more complicated to put every unit at the same or at the right spot at the right time. So what they ended up doing was trying to create a uniform command structure. So we have one tactical commander. They believe that that is one of the best ways to get hold of a naval operation and control either a naval amphibious operation or an amphibious defense. Now, not only that, but nowadays a naval operation or an amphibious operation would be more difficult. Not only because there's less material available to execute that operation, but also because, for a very simple practical reason, naval guns don't pack the same amount of punch as they once did. The biggest gun, or at least in the US Navy, I'm not sure about the other navies, I know that for the Dutch Navy is definitely true. The biggest gun is a 5-inch gun. The biggest guns during the naval operations, or the amphibious operations in the Pacific, for example, that the US was using, was, I believe, 16-inch guns from battleships. These, of course, can do a lot of damage to shore installations. 5-inch guns, no matter how much their ammunition has improved, just don't pack the same punch. They don't have the same oomph as those old guns. And surely they can fire farther, they can fire more accurately, but against a large amount of, let's say, concrete installations, how effective is that going to be? So your naval guns aren't exactly what they used to be. Now, that does also mean that you're going to have to find alternatives. what could those alternatives be? The alternative that was suggested by the author of the specific essay that I'm talking about is referring to, for example, using Tomahawks or any other kind of cruise missiles. Here's the problem though. A Tomahawk is a bloody expensive missile. I don't know exactly what they cost, but just consider that you'd want to level or at least destroy a large amount of facilities that are defending against naval op. You're going to have to fire a lot of cruise missiles. Really, a lot of these things. That would make it a very ineffective coastal support operation. It would make it a very bad economic prospect. As opposed to, for example, the battleships or the cruisers that were supporting amphibious operations in the past. So what ends up happening is that there's not really any good coastal support in order to provide support for an amphibious operation. Now you could say that that is the only problem, and it really isn't. Because as the author suggested, or as the author stated, there is really a bigger issue. That is actually defeating a naval operation, especially one by the US, but it pretty much goes for all the Western countries. It's defeating a naval operation or an amphibious operation before it even begins, which is loss of life. Let's face it, D-Day was a very, very costly operation in the sense of lives lost. It is unthinkable that something that scale, that scope, would happen these days. It just doesn't happen. Before that many lives would be lost, or let's say that many lives were lost, the public, and especially the public pressure on the politicians in command of the defense, would immediately go, no, we can't have this. Just cancel the whole op, cancel the war, we're not going. This is too much loss of life. And as the author stated, by this event, the US has done pretty much the thing that most countries were unable to do, which is to effectively create a defense against naval operations, or against amphibious operations, which is media. Just show them how much it's costing them, show them how many lives are being lost, and you're showing them exactly how to defeat a naval operation. Very interesting insight, because I had never considered that the loss of life would be such an important role or such an important factor in, let's say, combating a naval operation or any other kind of operation. I mean, I know it's being done, where you have several countries who are just going, or just refusing to fight because they fear the loss of life. The Netherlands had the same thing, and of course, it's tragic when your forces get wiped out, your soldiers die. But at the same time, isn't that why you're there? Do you really expect to send over your forces without losing any kind of operator? Especially a few years back when the Dutch forces were still in Afghanistan, there was a lot of media just covering the fact that some of the soldiers had been killed. Sure, but had you really expected anything else? I mean, it's an army. It's supposed to fight. It's not supposed to get defeated, but it is supposed to take losses. And that's something that we seem to have forgotten. And especially for future amphibious operations, that could be a significant problem. Anyway, so much for the naval strategy, naval tactics. You guys have recommended me some books last time. If you have any more, please do so. Please let me know what kind of interesting material I should be reading. I intend to be reading a little bit more about this, and let me know in the comments if you like these kinds of, let's say, storytelling or fact-sharing episodes from the War Room. Because I think that the War Room would be a very interesting platform for that. But, of course, as a viewer, as a subscriber, you get a big vote in that. So let me know what your thoughts are. Next up, I want to thank all the Patreon supporters. I really, really appreciate your support, guys. If you're not a Patreon supporter yet, and you want to contribute to this channel, even with as little as a few bucks a month, I'd really, really like your help. Links to that is in the description down below, and you can either sign up for the Patreon, or if you don't want to have a, let's say, consistent donation to the channel, there's also a PayPal link. Aside from that, I wanted to do a shout out to Rifta. He's made his first cinematic video. You can find that in the description down below, as well as a card next to this video. And let me know what you think. It's, I believe, not his first cinematic video. I saw a few more on his channel, but it's the first for Red Dragon. I think it's really good, possibly better than my own, because let's face it, the last one I did with the, let's say the Deadpool music, it was decent, it wasn't stellar. I was just throwing some images together, and I gotta say that Rifta does that a lot better. Anyway, what's happening this week with the channel? A lot of XCOM again, but I had to reduce it to 1 episode per day. I cannot keep up production with running 2 episodes per day. Last week I said I would do 2 episodes per day, but it's just too much. At that point I had a lot of spare material. Currently I don't have that many spare videos. So what I decided to do was do 1 episode of XCOM per day and 1 episode of Wargame Red Dragon or Wargame European Escalation per day. Don't worry, I have not forgotten on European Escalation. It's still a game that I do intend to play. It's just that it's gotten to the background a little bit because I was stalling really on redoing that operation where I had to evac my forces. I've recorded that, it's going to be up Tuesday on the channel, and I gotta say it's not particularly stellar. It's just a really effective and efficient way of running that operation. After having done that mission, well, I think about 8 to 9 times really. Aside from that, there will be a guaranteed Armored Warfare video this week. I know I have been forestalling that for a long time. I really should be doing more of that. And it's something that I will definitely be doing this time. One of you mentioned, or some of you mentioned, that I don't have any, or since I have a press account, I can easily cover the Chinese tanks. You're right, except that I don't have a press account that includes the Chinese vehicles. I'd have to grind those just as much as you. So what I've done is reach out to obsidian/my.com in order to get a press account, or to get my press account upgraded, so that I can review some more of the Chinese vehicles. I haven't really seen that many, I gotta say. I've been playing Armored Warfare a bit more lately in order to get back into the game. Really enjoying my Challenger 2, even in PvP nowadays. And the population on the server seems to be a lot better. A lot more people on, and this saves you from having to be in the queue for a long time, or from having to fail against very dedicated platoons. Aside from that, there was one question that came in from Adurian J5, or Adurian J5, sorry about that. What do you think of the 10-point recon unit, the M113 ACAV? Let's look it up. Go over to the armory. I do like the amount of availability that the US has for this vehicle, and especially for the entire recon tab. I mean, I think that the US, as well as the USSR, has the biggest recon tabs in the game. The unit that Adurian is talking about is the M113 ACAV. Just an M113 APC, armed with heavy machine guns, and having good optics, 70 kph off-road, autonomy 480, so that's decent, and a very attractive price point of only 10. I think it's a decent unit. I usually use the Humvee, especially the Mark 19 with the grenade launcher, because they have an interesting dual purpose. They can do a bit of anti-infantry support, and they are extremely fast at 90 kph. This one is decent, but usually what I look for in my vehicles is very good optics, such as the 551A1. Aside from that, what I usually use is the MUT M151A2. These have very good optics, and they're only 25 points, which, yeah, I know, still makes them twice and 2.5 times more expensive than the ACAV. But 25 points is still not a lot. They have better autonomy, better off-road speed, no gun, no armor. But that also means that they're not that likely to give their position away. In, for example, a thematic deck, where you'd have an armored section, I think that the ACAV could be a really interesting unit. There, definitely. Because the other cheapest unit you're going to get is the M114A2 with an autocannon, or the Bradley, but this thing is 4.5 times as expensive as the ACAV. Anyway, that concludes this week's War Room. I hope you enjoyed the naval tactics stories and the naval information. Let me know what your thoughts are on that, if you want to hear more about it, if you want to hear more on different topics, and I'll be sure to read up on those and share them, because they are really, really good reads. If you want to support my channel, be sure to head over to the Patreon link down in the description, or visit the PayPal, and I can keep up producing 2 videos per day, possibly even more. We'll have to see about that. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being a subscriber. Hope you enjoyed, and have a good week.